Hello and welcome to Budos. My hands feel particularly glowing today, so perhaps you will gain some healing value from having them right up in your face like that. I know that this is a kind of ASMR thing to do this kind of stuff, so, and I can feel that that does something. Hello, welcome. Right, so here's my glowing spiritual hands. Welcome to Budos, and the topic is today death number 2, death 2, the revenge of death. As if dying once wasn't enough, death 2, death again, re-death, death twice, the sequel, death to you, death 2. Right, so I've already done one video about this entitled Death, and now this is one that's just entitled Death 2. So, okay, now that I've messed around doing that for a while, I'm going to stop because it's starting to ache my shoulder, like. Yeah, I don't know. I look weird at the moment to myself. I look weird onto myself. I don't know what's changed, other than I had a shave. But so it feels like my face structure has changed yet again. It's always perturbing when that happens, and I'm sure it will change back to normal after a while as well. Or you know, I don't know what's going on, but it's something to do with my hair as well. It's just everything looks a bit strange. So I've just finished reading this book, The Courage to Grieve by Judy Tatelbaum. Tatelbaum. Oh, Tatelbaum, oh, Tatelbaum. Christmas tree. Yeah. Creative living, recovery, and growth through grief. The Courage to Grieve. If you are interested in grieving and you've never grieved before, or you know you'd like to do some grieving, then this I would definitely say is the book for you. Now, me, having done a hell of a lot of grieving in my time for various different things, not just deaths, but grieving is just associated with loss of all different kinds, and also trauma. Having done a lot of grieving, I have read through this book, and basically it's just said, yes, you have done this already. I've got through the end of it, and bear in mind, I have taken a long time to read this book. Okay, I got this book. Well, I first got this book about 2 years ago, or maybe more, and I read through a bit of it. I got about, I don't know, a few chapters in, maybe 5 or 6 chapters in, and then I just kind of gave up. And then this year, I rebought it because I realised I hadn't finished it, and I was like, I want to fucking finish it this time. And I have finished it, and I actually had a goal to read it through, all the way through, once, all the way through in a 24-hour period. I don't know exactly why I formulated that goal, but at the time it felt like a good idea, because I just wanted to be able to get an overview of the whole thing. It's only a short book. Maybe it's something to do with like improving my reading speed. 162 real pages. There's like the notes and stuff at the back, which I don't really count them as real pages. Yeah, so 162 pages. Now I can read 162 pages in a 24-hour period. Because I'm an author, I write a lot and I read a lot. You know, I read like a mad person these days. I just kind of suck in books through the eyes, and I can just read so quick. I'm very proud of myself for that, obviously. Yeah, but it's not going to save me from death, is it? No. But yeah, I couldn't get through this one. I couldn't not get through it. It's just so fucking hard. Now, I got a twofold recommendation. So firstly it's a recommendation, and secondly it's an anti-recommendation. Like, I recommend it if you have never done any spiritual work at all, if you have never done any grieving at all, you've never had any therapy at all, you've never encountered loss particularly before, and this is your first time going through a spiritual awakening or a grief experience, a death experience of any kind. So whether it be the death of a job, the death of a partner or of a family member, anything like that, or if you just want to familiarize yourself with it because you are working with people who are dying or who are ill or whatever, I recommend it for that level. But I do not recommend it if you have already done a lot of therapy, if you've already done a lot of spiritual work, if you have already started to confront death, if you've already gone through a hell of a lot of loss, or done a lot of personal development as well. I cannot recommend it for someone who's gone through a lot of spirituality, internal processing, because honestly, this will do you good if you are opening up to your feelings, if you're firstly taking like the first kind of insight into the internal world and the world of consciousness and the thinking and feeling about death and dying and what happens next, and confronting your own truth about life, and it will do a lot to help you with that. In fact, I would probably recommend this as one of the first books you should read, along with a spiritual text, like something like The Power of Now or A New Earth or the Tao Te Ching. Tao Te Ching is a bit intense to begin with, but the Bible's good as long as you don't read it from a Christian perspective. You just read it as read it as a person, read it as you reading the Bible, not as I'm going to become a Christian to read the Bible. No, just read it for your own mind and for your own thoughts and feelings and your own experience. Read the Bible, the New Testament, because I've never read anything else, and I haven't even read the full New Testament either. But yeah, the Bible's all right because there's a lot of nonsense in there to tide you over with, while you make sense of the more deeper stuff that's in there. Because there's a lot of nonsense that keeps the mind going, eh? So the mind is, when you come across stuff like this or a spiritual text, initially when you come into contact with a spiritual text, your mind is going to take the content of what's in a book, and your mind is going to go mad with the content. So your mind is going to latch onto the ideas and the turns of phrase and the words and and your mind is going to think that it's got what's going on. But but then as you go through a spiritual journey and you progress in terms of, your mind quietens down and your emotions start to dissolve, and you feel like you're in contact with truth on a more regular basis or in a deeper way, then the mind realizes that all the things that you initially thought on encountering the spiritual text have subsequently changed or become irrelevant, and in fact that you got all fucking wrong. So your understanding develops as you go along. And so if you've gone through a lot of spiritual work in terms of like clearing up your mind stream, which I maybe should do a video about that, clearing up your mind stream, dissolving difficult emotions and turbulence in the emotional heart body system, and you have surrendered your ego to a deeper truth and a deeper sense of self, or a more expansive, more vast sense of self, a more saucy, a more source related God consciousness type of self. If you've done a lot of that, then books like this, unfortunately, are not really going to do much for you, because this, as I have read through it, has the really intense feeling of identification with form. Which means, because it's all about death and grief and dying, right? So this book has a real concentrated energy of how to deal with pain. So this would probably be amazing for you if you were literally just starting to go into grief about losing someone. However, because of its emphasis on the reality of death and the permanence of death as being truth, this is not so good, because essentially what this the overall message I've taken from this is that pain is real, pain is true, death is real, death is true, death is everlasting, death is permanent, pain is permanent. There's all this kind of, that is a big component in this, which is intense identification with form, which brief description of identification with form, which means where you as consciousness, you as a deeper being, as a deeper self, identify with the forms of life. So that you identify with your emotions, you identify with your mind, your body, and what that means, identification means you believe that thing, those objects of consciousness, you believe objects of consciousness to be what you are. So some of your sense of self gets tied up in the mind, gets tied up in the body, gets tied up in the emotions, to the point where you no longer know yourself as the pristine, clear awareness of consciousness. You no longer know yourself to be just an emanation of truth or light or wisdom or whatever, or love is another way to say it. So your deep sense of self becomes overshadowed or caught up in or taken over by the objects that occur within that sense of self. So you could even be possessions, material possessions. You become identified with them. So when someone takes a possession of yours, you feel it's like they're taking a part of you away, and so you feel like all this pain and stuff. Well, this book, it starts to become basically an intensification of identification with form. And what I've learned from this actually is that death, as we usually understand it, is representational of an intensification of identification with form. So what that means is the way we normally think of death is a projection of our consciousness deeply identifying with the forms of our consciousness. So, oh God, it's almost like death. Our conception of death, generally speaking, is the ultimate untruth of life. That the way that we experience or think about death is the ultimate unreality, in fact. And that the reality of life is that there is no such thing as death. No one, nothing ever dies, because the only true thing that is real is the depths of consciousness itself, or the truth of consciousness itself. So I will never die. My face, these appearances, the words, those are just forms. They are just like a sheet over the top of what I really am, which is just this vast, infinite consciousness. And like, I know that to be true. I know it in the just listening to the depths of what I am. I know it in examining what is death from what I've seen of death, whether it be in films, whether it be in real life where people I know have died. All that I ever see happen, in fact, is a transmutation of one form into another in a process. That's all I've ever seen, all I've ever known of death. But what we project as death is an abrupt end of life, a kind of complete and utter annihilation of life, the complete stopping of life, which is not the case at all. Even when, so you see a bird, for example, fall from a tree. Unlucky if you happen to observe that, because it's not exactly a pleasant experience. So a bird keels over having had a heart attack and lands on the floor dead, right? Now, from you as an observing being, consciousness, person even, person, there's a lot of talk about release the person, whatever. Surrender their sense of person. I think the person, as we usually use the word person, is quite a good expression of what it means to be a being. Person and being, I feel, are almost interchangeable for me. Person is a slightly weaker form of saying being to me. But some spiritual teachers use the word person to mean more like an ego self. But person to me means an embodiment of consciousness. Anyway, so you as a witnessing presence, watching this bird plop onto the floor after having had a heart attack, all you observe is one moment there's this bird sitting, tweeting, whatever. Then you observe it go like that in the tree, to which you may experience some emotion, like, oh, shock, maybe confusion. What's going on here? Is that normal? The bird goes right. So you just watch. So continuously, the continuousness of this whole thing is just a continuous flow of form changing from one form to another. And even at a deeper level, you can't say from one form to another, because you have 1 minute you have the bird there, and it's only when you start slicing up life to say, well, here is a bird on a tree, here is a bird going like this, here is a bird in midair, here is the bird dead on the floor. You know, it's only when you chop up your perception of life that we even have the sense of one form changing into another. Because in truth, in reality, forms is just an ongoing sense of life, basically. The realm of form, this life that we have here, is just an ongoing continuousness of life. And really, if you want to get completely technical about it, there's no difference between the formless and the form realm. So stillness pervades all of these forms anyway. Death is present within life at all times, is another way to say it. Yeah, so bird plops to the floor dead. So, and all you ever observe is a continuous stream of form. So you see the bird there, you see it go, you see it fall through the air, you see it plop onto the floor. And if you were to continue observing it, you'd see a continuous stream of form, changing from one state, if you like, to another, or from one shape and size and form into another, which would be, for example, the bird sits there for a while, as in it lies there dead, and nothing happens, but then maybe some flies come along, and your observation of it would be a sense of continuousness, continuous observation, continuous seeing of this bird there. You might start to have more observation of your thinking or your feelings about the bird, and maybe you want to touch it and see if it's okay, and then you realize it's dead. So this is all a continuousness of change of form, isn't it? And then you go, yeah, well, it's definitely not getting back up again. So then you think maybe I should bury it. But if you just left it there, you would see that bird, which is no longer really a bird anymore. It's like a dead bird now. It's a dead bird on the floor. The flies may come and start munching it. You know, if you were to sit there and watch it intently every day, you may find it starts to look more and more gross as things go on. You know, its eyes starts to melt into it. It putrefies, basically, is what you call it, isn't it? It goes through putrefaction, what do you call it? It mulches. It eats itself and desiccates and stuff. So, but this is all still forms changing. I'm just going to wait and see what's going on with my video. On the screen it's frozen. I don't think that's did anything. Well, something's still recording. I don't know what exactly. Hello! Hello! It's a continuous flow of form. Who knows? What are we going to do? Dun, dun, dun. Well, I'll carry on, and if it doesn't work, then I'll re-record it anyway. Or I might just not bother. Death 2. Yeah, so it's all a continuous flow of form. So, and similarly, when people I know who have died, again, all it is a continuous flow of form. So, I don't know what I will experience when I die, other than a continuous flow of form, and then maybe I'll just cease to experience form, and just only experience the formless. I don't know exactly, but I don't believe in death as such anymore. I think this is what reading this book has really brought to me, is that I don't believe death is actually a real phenomena. I feel like death is as real as the sun rising and setting, which means like kind of like, so what? It's just something that happens. It's just another change of form. Um, and maybe that sounds callous, but I feel like I feel kind of like nothing is lost. That nothing is lost when someone or something dies. Like I don't feel like my granddad is really dead. My first granddad. I don't feel like he's really dead. I mean, there's a picture of him, and that's enough for me to understand that he in his essence is still true. He in his essence has gone nowhere. As in, I don't mean like he's kind of haunting me or anything. I mean that like what he really is not changed. So what we all really are is the unchanging, and it's only the forms of this life that change. And I suppose that we are here to delight in the changing nature of these forms and to create different forms that are to bring us different feelings of pleasure and stuff. And that's what the experiencing of being alive is just there for. But yeah, I mean, and my other granddad, you know, I don't really think he's dead. I'm not sure he was really alive to begin with, but I don't feel like I don't feel like anyone has ever died. Not really. Not really and truly. Not like not at the core of the being, because there's only one true being. There's only one true self. So all of these little beings like Einstein or Gandhi or whoever, famous people, Kurt Cobain, all these are just like kind of small little chunks or expressions or aspects of this one truth that's just continuous. So people come and go. And I suppose maybe going through so many celebrity deaths recently, and so many deaths in my, not in my family, but in the local people around me, I've just realised I don't think that no one's actually really dying, because a sense of life is continuous through all of it. Those are my thoughts. So, but I wouldn't encourage you to read this if you've gone through a lot of grief and healing already, because this for me was actually just an unnecessarily painful experience. That I felt that the pain was more contained within the book than within me. It was like I was absorbing pain from the book rather than it helping me to deal with any pain that I might already have. So I actually, when I finished the book, I was like, oh, get off, get away from me. Yeah, so I don't know. I would advise reading something more uplifting, basically, instead of reading this. But if you have never come across any form of distress or loss or suffering or pain or death, you know, death in the conventional sense that someone you knew has apparently died, that I would recommend it, because this will be a great introduction, and it will really pace you through that grief experience from your own perspective, for your own feelings, right? But it gets to the point where it's done that, and then if you continue going into it, like if you hold on to that experience, then you're just going to end up intensifying your sensation that death is real. And as I say, I don't feel anymore that death is real. And for us to think or to believe that death is real, or like real in terms of an ending, or real in terms of like an experiential phenomena, I'm not sure we can actually experience death. I don't think we can experience death, because the experiencer must persist. You can't experience death, because the conventional understanding of death is that the experiencer disappears. But there can be no death if the experiencer disappears. Does that make sense? Because what is death without an experiencer? How would you know you've died? You can't. It's impossible. There is no death without consciousness. So consciousness must persist past this thing we call death. I mean, it's like, if you extrapolate out from your own experience of other people dying, then you can come to the conclusion that, okay, so all I have experienced of death so far, anyway, has been the dissolution of some sets of forms. So some people who were there have now not, and they're not there anymore. So they've dissolved. They've vanished in a way from my life. And so all death really is just a kind of lessening of forms that's just form just has had enough time now, and it's just floats away. So if you extrapolate that out, well, in each case, whoever has died in your life, life continues on for you and for other people. So you can extrapolate out that when this body dies, that when I die in this body, that life is going to continue on, and therefore it must be that consciousness continues on. Consciousness as a whole, not necessarily located in this body anymore. But I can imagine that when this body dies, that life is going to go on around me, as in around this body, and will continue going on, and there will just be a continuous succession of forms. So what am I? I am not this body. I am the giant infiniteness within which all of these different comings and goings of form take place. If you imagine what could death possibly be for you, I can only imagine that it will come to me in an understanding of a sensation, imagery, sounds, feelings, thoughts. So, painful ones maybe, or maybe it may be an intensification of a sense of extreme pleasure or ecstasy, which is something new that I picked up from this book, that some people know that death can be a sensation of ecstasy, which would be good. But yeah, and there is therefore no difference between dying and drinking a cup of orange juice, in that a cup of orange juice is coming to me now in the form of imagery, sensation in the fingers, smell. So in what I'm trying to say is that for you to experience death, and even what happens after death, for example, let's say there's an afterlife. Well, if you arrive in an afterlife, once this body goes, your soul or consciousness, whatever, transmutes into some other form, well, it can only come as some object of consciousness, whether that's some subtle sensation of some kind, or some knowing that consciousness is aware of something. There's an awareness of something, and we don't know what it might be in the next realm, yeah, but it's going to be something that is held within consciousness, because how could it be otherwise? Another way to say it would be held within the realm of existence. Therefore, death occurs in existence. Death occurs in life. Death only can ever occur within existence or life. So therefore, death is not real, because life or existence, being, consciousness, is primary and continuous, ever present. So death is only something that ever happens as another form, another transmutation in front of the screen of consciousness, or within the realm of consciousness, or within the within existence itself. So yeah. So there you go. So that's my thoughts about death. Obviously, that's not to say that there aren't still feelings that are going to come when significant people in my life die, because obviously my body and my emotions are in connection with these people in life now. So it's not like I'm saying, oh, death doesn't exist, because on the level of form, death does exist. But in the reality, the deepest truth of life, it doesn't exist. And in the same way that the person will die, and in the same way that someone will die in my life, similarly, my thoughts about them, my feelings about them will go through, are observable in consciousness, is what I'm saying. So I observe the person die, then I observe that they are not there anymore. Then I'm observing that I'm going through grief. I'm sad. I'm wailing. I'm gnashing of teeth. I'm digging a grave. I'm jumping in the grave for a while and going, fuck me. I'm getting out of the grave. I'm going like this with some little fanfare thing and going, I don't know. Maybe it's someone who I didn't like who died. Right? But I'm observing all of this. So in the same way that I observed this person die, I then observe myself go through grief. So I don't know. I don't even know if the thing's fucking recording anymore. So I'm just going to stop now. But that's my second piece of information on death. Death number 2. Maybe there's another idea here. There is another idea that this is just one big, massive denial that I'm in. Massive, massive, such a deep denial that I cannot even see it after reading a book for about a year about grief and death and dying. The amount of time it says the word death. Check this out. Right, one chapter is called Grief and Death, and here it goes: accepting death as reality. Death is a natural part of living, yet we act as if death is an outrage. We see death as our enemy. We see ourselves as death's potential victims. Each of us will die. It is simply a matter of time. Each of us is like an artist working with an unknown deadline, which is our death sentence. How can we learn to accept death as natural? If you can begin to see death as an invisible but friendly companion on your life's journey, gently reminding you not to wait till tomorrow to do what you mean to do, then you can learn to live your life rather than simply passing through it. Unfortunately, because we deny the existence of death, we make it all the more frightening and difficult to face. Our own death is unimaginable. We have a, quote, curious conviction that we are immortal. We can't really imagine ourselves dead. When you dream about death, you dream you are a perceiving dead person and not a person who is non-existent. Our denial is supported by our rarely seeing natural human deaths. Many deaths take place outside of our view in hospitals and nursing homes. What we do see daily are violent deaths on television, the result of murder, war, and accidents. Death is thus dramatized as unnatural. That's only that page. Unexpected and horrible. Elizabeth Kubler-Ross notes, in our unconscious mind, we can only be killed. It is inconceivable for us to die of natural causes or of old age. We also deny death by not talking about it. We continue to share with our remotest ancestors the most tangled and evasive attitudes about death. We have as much distaste for talking about personal death as for thinking about it. It is an indelicacy, like talking in mixed company about venereal disease or abortion in the old days. Denial of death creates many problems for us. It is the denial of death that is partially responsible oh God, for people living empty, purposeless lives. For when you live as if you'll live forever, it becomes, no, I don't think I'm personally in this body going to live forever, but I know that I as consciousness will be and is just permanently foreverness. It becomes too easy to postpone the things you know that you must do. You live your life in preparation for tomorrow or in remembrance of yesterday, and meanwhile each today is lost. If we do not deny death, we fear it. We may have a healthy respect for death or for time running out on us, or we may worry too much about danger, illness, or aging. Some of us spend inordinate amounts of time contemplating death, even terrorizing ourselves, in order to gain the upper hand over this frightening phenomenon. Invariably, we make ourselves miserable rather than more powerful. Like denial, the fear of death not only makes it hard for us to confront loss and death in our lives, but it may prevent us from fully living, from loving, and from risking. Somewhere among the denial of death, the obsessive fear of death, and the contemplation of suicide is a healthy awareness and acceptance of death as a natural reality that gives our lives context and meaning. Viktor Frankl writes, "The meaning of human existence is based on its irreversible quality. Mastery of our..." This is not... End quote. "Mastery of our fear of death..." Mastery of our fear of death enables us to admit that we will die, which then gives us an opportunity for making our lives more meaningful now. Expecting that we will die, we cannot as easily take life for granted or put off living until some unsure future. We are more apt to take action and live our lives fully. Peter Kirstenbaum, everyone's names end in Baum these days, suggests some philosophical values resulting from the acceptance of death. We need death in order to save a life. Death is an invention needed and therefore created for the sake of feeling alive. That sounds more like it. Death puts us in touch with the sense of a real individual existence. Death. And so on. The amount of times a book says the word death, it's like, I don't need that. That's not actually helping anymore, you know. I spent a long period of my life confronting the idea of death and the feeling of death and trying to abstract what and understand what is death and all this crap. And it's like, I've done this already now. I've actually done this already. I don't need to... In a way, this can only really get you to conceptually understand it. And the conceptual understanding of death is invested with a hell of a lot of pain. So, I advise you to read that if it's your first time dealing with a death or a loss or you want to just explore into death and spirituality. And grief, of course, grief, because it's the courage to grieve, not necessarily about death, but grief, yes. But if you've already done a fair amount of work in the spiritual stuff, I would advise against it, because it's just going to bring about an intensification of identification with form, which, you know, you may gain benefit from. I personally did not, because all it has done is just, not triggered, but it's like there's more pain in that book than there is in my life. So to read the book is just putting pain into my system that I don't need. So there you go. However, just having said that, if you've never accepted that there's pain inside you, this is a good way to get into it, because it will be helpful at a certain level of consciousness. But after you reach a certain point in your identification back into being consciousness, then this will no longer serve you. But it may well serve you to begin with. The Courage to Grieve.